I'm Brenda. I'm an art teacher for Arts for the Schools. We're a nonprofit organization that provides arts education for over 10,000 local students. We're really excited to bring you some visual art lessons during this break. Today we are going to create one of the local native trees here in the Tahoe Basin. The materials that you'll need for this lesson are a set of oil-colored pastels, a set of watercolors. Watercolors can come in sets, pre-made. They come in tubes, or you can also get a liquid form. You'll need an assortment of brushes. Here I have some really large brushes and smaller brushes for some details and shading. You'll need some water to use with your watercolors, a pencil, and preferably some watercolor paper that's tall and white and a nice heavy weight. Okay, let's get started with learning how to use these oil pastels. There are a few techniques that will be very handy when trying to create our bark and our pine needles. The first technique I like to call smudging in. Smudging in is a great technique to use when you're trying to fill in areas but maintain a shape. So we can start by drawing a nice round circle with a lot of oil color. And then we can use our finger to smudge in. You can see here how I'm maintaining the outside edge of my circle, and I'm filling in the center with the color. If you feel like you need to add some more color, feel free to go add more oil pastel and see how you can smudge in to create a nice solid shape. This also helps to get the oil pastels to stick to the watercolor paper. The next technique that I like to use, especially when creating the Jeffery Pine needles, is called smudging out. Smudging out is going to create a burst-like effect, and if you layer over that with some different shades of green or different shades of any color, you can start to see how it will start to create pine needle-like shapes. So as you smudge out, it creates a softer effect on the edge. You can go back and add some other shades or tints of color. And I am right now trying to create something that looks like a Jeffery Pine needle cluster. We're going to use red and yellow, and let's see what happens. So the first blending is just putting a splotch of color on your paper and then adding a color over it. You can see that it's starting to turn orange, and the more yellow that I add to my red, the lighter the red will become and turn into a nice orange hue. The next blending technique I'm going to show you is called three-hue blending. So we are trying to go from one color to the blended color and then finishing off with the other color. So we're going to start by just adding the red at the bottom and lightly adding some red to the middle. And then we'll go up towards the top and add our yellow, coming down to the center again and overlapping and blending the red and yellow together. To help with this smooth transition, you want to add just a little bit of red onto the yellow, and then use your oil pastel to blend the oil pastel into the paper. And you can see that it's created a nice transition from red to orange to a lighter orange, and then finally to a solid yellow. The next technique is called hatching, and this is helpful for creating some texture in your piece. So hatching can go in one direction, it could also go in two directions. And you can also use other colors in your hatching to give it some depth and even more texture. This technique is going to be very helpful when we're creating our bark of our tree. The last technique is cross hatching, and it can also be done in one direction, two directions, three directions. You can also use different types of lines. So I'm going to use some squiggly lines, and also maybe even try some circular type of lines. And again, you can use 2 colors, 3 colors, however many colors you want. In the bark of our trees, we'll probably be using up to 4 colors to create the nice texture of the bark that we're looking for. So you can go in circles, you can go the opposite direction, giving it a really textury feel. And you can see how there's still some white spaces in my blue and red. So I'm going to go ahead with my purple and just color in those sections. And you can see what a different kind of texture each of these hatching techniques creates. I'm going to demonstrate how to draw the Jeffery Pine. Jeffery pines are very tall, and this is why I suggested using a tall piece of paper. So we're going to start at the bottom and give it a nice little root area. And as the tree trunk goes up, we're going to get it thinner and thinner until we come to the top of our tree. When adding the branches, we want to think about the idea that branches don't just come out of the side of the tree. They come out of all of the sides of the tree. Jeffery pines tend to grow upwards towards the sun. So we want to make sure that our branches also grow upwards towards the sun. So we're just going to do some thinner branches at the top. Maybe some are coming from behind our tree. You can have some come straight out from the front of the tree. And as the branches get lower, they get thicker. You want to remember to erase the lines that are overlapped, which will start to help your tree have a more three-dimensional appearance. You can have some branches coming off of these branches, just as long as they're all kind of curving up towards the sun. Don't worry about the ends because we will be adding lots and lots of pine needle clusters to our Jeffery Pine to give it the realistic look of the tree. Oftentimes Jeffery Pines don't have many branches towards the bottom. So when you get closer to the bottom, make sure your branches are getting thicker and that at some point there are no more branches. And again, erasing those overlapping branches. So we are not going to draw the texture of the tree bark because we're going to create it with our oil pastels. So I know that the colors that I'm going to need are brown and some black, some white, and maybe even a little bit of red and purple. Purple works really well in the shadow, for the shadow areas of the bark. And we're gonna wait till the very end to add just a little bit of black to try to create some more depth in our tree bark. So I know that Jeffery Pines have these very segmented sections. So I'm just gonna start with my brown and start to add some of those segments. And also as the segments go up, just like the branches, they get smaller. This will also help to create some perspective, as if we were looking at the tree from the ground up. You're going to want to add all of the initial segments first, and then we will go back in with some blending and hatching techniques to create a realistic look of the bark. One thing that I'd like to mention is that you can see that some of the white of the watercolor paper is still coming through. We want to make sure to make our oil pastel section of our piece solid color so that when we add our watercolor, those sections remain the color that we planned them to be. So feel free at any time to pause the video so that you can take your time creating these nice sections on your branches and on the tree trunk. Once you have most of the sections done, I like to go through and add some solid brown to some of the sections, maybe not all of them. So I'm just going to lightly add a little bit of black, especially to the side of my tree since my light source is coming from the right. And you can see that the black isn't really showing up as black, but making the brown look just a little bit darker, which is kind of what we want to add to our little sections here. And you can see that I'm using that kind of cross-hatchy technique where I'm going in all different directions and trying to make it look textured as I go. And like I said before, please feel free to stop the video at any time or pause and go back and look at your tree. I'm going rather fast because I've done this before and I really know what these trees look like. Now that we have all of our sections of the tree bark completed, we want to go back and start to add some of those shadow areas in between the bark sections. So we're going to get our black oil pastel and just start to fill in all of the white areas that are not yet filled in. Make sure that you're covering up all of the white paper and that the black is a solid color all the way through the whole entire trunk. Okay, looks like our bark is almost finished and it's going to be time to move on to creating some of those Jeffery Pine poofs or needle clusters that are make the Jeffery Pine such a distinctive looking pine tree. So we're going to grab as many color greens as we can, along with some brown for the centers of our poofs. So we're going to start with the darkest or the middle color green that you have. Hopefully you have more than one color green, and if not, that's okay. It still creates a really nice look as long as you're making those poof like needle clusters of the Jeffery Pine. So you're just going to go all around each branch and even out from there and just add those star-like poofs. And I would do all one color first so that you know where you want to add more colors and which ones you feel you could just leave. Some of them might be behind the tree, on the tree, definitely at the ends of all of these branches that we've created. So I'm basically starting in the center and making X's and then more X's until it appears to have many, many needles coming out. Don't worry about filling in all of the white space because our watercolor wash that we are going to add to the background is going to fill all of those little white areas in very nicely. Once you feel like you have enough green, you can go back in and just in the centers, just give a little splash of brown for a little shading in those needles and just a little more color. The more you can add, the more realistic your tree is going to look. And don't worry if it's neat, because trees are very organic, and when it's kind of messy, it gives it more of that organic look. So don't worry about how perfect each of your needle clusters is. You can even add a few pine cones if you want, just making these nice organic pine cone shapes in random areas. Going back and just adding a little bit of texture, since we're not really trying to make it look perfectly realistic. Just making an expression of the Jeffery Pine. At this time, you could also add a little more shading, maybe underneath each of the branches of the tree. With the black. And maybe adding a little splashes of black to the one side of the tree that is not being lit up from this side. So take your time to go back and fix up any little details that you want, any white spaces that you want to be filled in. Now is a good time to do that. Because next we are going to be adding our watercolor wash to the background to complete our piece. You can even add some little tiny branches to those poofs that maybe are kind of sticking out in the middle of nowhere. Just adding little lines of branches will help it to look a little more full and realistic. So once you're satisfied with the amount of pine needle poofs and the bark and the shading and the lighting from this side of the tree, it's now time to switch over to using some watercolors. The nice thing about using watercolors with oil pastels is that oil and water do not mix. So therefore, you can paint right over the tree and the watercolor will not stick to those oil pastels. So we definitely want to create a little bit of a setting here for our tree. So I'm going to start at the bottom and get some green going on here. And I want to make some mountains. So when using a dry watercolor palette, it's good to get some of that paint ready. So you can see here that I'm adding a bunch of water to my dried oil, watercolors and just getting a bunch of paint ready here. So I want to make some mountains in the background, and you can make them jagged or maybe like rolling hilly mountains, whatever kind of mountains you would like to add. So you can see that I've added some grass in the front area here and some steeper mountains in the back with a different color. Once you're satisfied with the mountains and the foreground and the grass, we're going to move on to the sky. So the sky is fun because you can make some clouds. So the way we're going to create clouds is by leaving the white space. So I'm just going to choose some areas where I do not want any paint to go. And I'm going to carefully add water around those areas. So I'm going to add a cloud right here. And maybe another cloud over on this side. And maybe even a little cloud in behind the tree here. So as you add the watercolor paint, being careful to stay away from the white areas you want to be clouds, you just carefully pull away from those areas, and a little might get in there and it will create a really soft, pretty cloud area. If you happen to get some watercolor colors on your mountains that you don't want there, just simply take a paper towel and dab up the colors that you do not want there. So you can pull a little bit of the blue into the cloud just to give it a little shape. Thank you so much for joining us today, and don't forget, we're a donation-based nonprofit, so if you'd like to do a donation, click on the links at the end of this video.